to find it. But I did find about Ahmed Hazard Khan when he mentioned it here about when the keeper stayed at the dock, Royal Victoria Dock for a month being refitted. He writes that he went to Aldgate, commercial Aldgate. He had a friend working in a factory he knew, so he went to visit him and he spent time with him and he was let off ship. Although they weren't officially let off ship, he was let off ship and he returned to ship. So I kind of figured out what he'd done, as in he went to meet friends that worked at a factory, Aldgate, commercial road, and a factory. So I kind of got the idea, and I also kind of like worked up the crew list from the Lashkar agreements that they would have had received less rations in food compared to a British seafarer. Is that?
The reason I was asking is that for the white seamen, because I was working on the white European seamen in Indian port cities, and there was this floating chapel for them, there was a library for them, entertainment for them. So this was, whenever I was researching on them, I was constantly thinking that what was happening to the to the Lascars, like was something separate for them as well, like taking care of their daily lives.
I think there was to some extent, because I came across a Lascars club, should I say, or Lashkar club on Victoria Dock Road, and it survived opposite the Angel Building, which still survives there. And it was actually a club set up by, I think, A.K. Chowdhury, and in the Lashkar club they were allowed to pray for Friday prayers on a Friday. And for various other accounts I read for Lashkar crew on ship, I read accounts where they offered prayers on board ship. They also carried out funeral service in the Muslim tradition and buried bodies at sea. So I read this case of Mir Faisal, for example. He died on a voyage from London to New York, and midway he died. It was actually returning from New York to London. He died on board ship during the voyage, and he was actually buried at sea. And then there's a mention in the crew list about how weights were attached to his bodies, how the funeral rites were offered. But I don't think, it doesn't exactly elaborate as to how the funeral rites were offered, or if there was an imam on board or a Muslim priest. So I'm not too sure 100% if they were received the rites, but I think, from what I understand, I presume other South Asian seafarers or Muslims would have performed the funeral rites, for example.
And Georgie, you mentioned Caroline Adams's book, which records a lot of the Sylheti and the Bengali seafarers who came in that kind of interwar and post-war period, and they talk a lot about in that oral history collection about their kind of day-to-day life, both aboard the ships and in the ports and in the docks, and life afterwards. But you're absolutely right, coming back to the colleague there who talked about how much of that history is recorded, it stays within our community, and unless we kind of make those efforts to talk to the generations who are here now, again, there's a whole nother layer and generations of history that we're kind of in danger of losing as well. So I really welcome what you said, Asif, about having those conversations with your parents, with your grandparents, because that's the kind of knowledge that isn't archived in those kind of documents, and which we are in danger of losing. Georgie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that when we're talking about the oral histories, we shouldn't just be talking about those recorded of people who are living here. So people in the position of Asif's grandmother, for example, interviewing people who are in the villages where great-grandfathers have come from, about the stories that have been recorded, which are there, which I haven't really come across. But Yusuf Chaudhry, who did a similar job to Caroline Adams in the 1980s and 90s of recording the stories of seafarers in Birmingham. He wrote a very powerful sentence about how nobody heard the cries of the women in the villages of Bengal when ships were torpedoed. Ooh. And that just resonates across the world, really. And that's one of the reasons why I'm always, I'm wanting to make sure that your grandmother is there, because, she didn't lose her son in the war, but how many people did? And whenever people talk about the Blitz here in London, and don't also talk about people who were lost on the other side of the world, who had people working in ships, everywhere. I just think about those words, and I don't know whether this UNESCO money is also being focused in villages in Nepal or in Sylhet.
The convention's an international, universal convention. They don't give money, and the money is here with the Heritage Lottery Fund. But the convention is important in protecting these histories and stories. It gives communities power. Communities decide what heritage they protect and safeguard for the future. So that's why we need to sign up to that convention. Britain hasn't, UK hasn't to date. And the convention became effective in 2006. So it's been a long time. We are only a handful of countries who haven't done it yet.
Thank you. I'm really conscious of time, and we are going to close on time. But we have a couple more questions. So we've got 3 questions. I'm going to make them really super quick. I'm going to make the answers super quick too. I'm going to go to
Thank you so much, Asif. I absolutely love hearing your story. I'll never get tired of it every time I've heard it since we first met in 2017. What I really love about your story is the fact that it debases ideas of heroism, of belonging, of citizenship, and as Georgie has just pointed out, interconnectedness. Because what it really shows is that, under the Nationality Acts that were recognised at the time, by being awarded the British War Medal, these people were interconnected, they belonged to the Empire, they were recognised as citizens, and I love the way Shabila drew the comparisons to the Windrush generation. And we can see these histories that are, have been articulated, and we need to have a much more explicit conversation about citizenship, belonging, and the context and the repercussions of empire and colonialism. And that needs to, as you said, needs to start in schools, but it also just needs to be more explicit, because I think your story epitomises those complications and starts to undermine what we think belonging is, what we think heroism is, what we think the First World War is, what we think migration is, because people just look at Windrush, and it's so much bigger than that. And although we talk about contributions, it's not about contributions, it's about being, it's about belonging, it's about citizenship. So it's not just about being worthy, although medals are about being worthy. I think there is definitely something more about, we were put on this planet together through many cataclysmic events and awful takeovers and land grabs and horrible colonialism. But we're here sitting today as the sort of the people that live with those repercussions, and we need to have those conversations. And the fact that we're still having these conversations now means that we haven't resolved it.
Thank you. There's now 4 questions. And then there's just 2 more just towards back there as well.
My name is Alan Barty, wonderful presentation, Asif and Georgie, and the wonderful detective work. Thank you. My point is about the ability to settle in the UK. And I just wonder if this is a matter of British law or a matter of naval discipline, because my father came to Britain in 1927. Doesn't seem to have had a problem settling in the UK. And there were other people from the Indian subcontinent who my father was friends with, who also came around that time, also didn't seem to have a problem settling here. But as a matter of naval discipline, we've always had an issue about how to get seafarers. And there were press gangs in the past trying to get people into the Royal Navy and so on. So I wonder if it's more a matter of naval discipline than a matter of being the law saying you cannot settle in the UK. That's why, coming back to the point that the lady made over here about provisioning for seamen on shore. Much of that was done by charities in the church. So the church would have had places for seamen to go, and there would have been charities which provided for seamen, like the one that you actually mentioned. I imagine that was a charity of some kind. So it's not necessarily that they were being excluded. There may have been places for them to go. It's possible that those places were more associated with Christian worship and Christian church, and some, maybe perhaps the Muslim seafarers didn't want to go there, but that's a different issue.
Thank you, thank you. I'm just going to take the final two questions at the back there as well. So, and I'll actually ask you to answer them in your closing remarks, just to kind of round them all up. So, thank you.
Thank you. It's Dr. Anne Sampson of the Great Hall Africa Association. Hello, Asif. Good to see you again, and thank you for your story, which I've heard before. But what really came across today is the commonality with the African story of the First World War, and a lot of the seafarers obviously stopped off in Africa as well along the way. And there's no real question here, it's just confirming about the differences, and in terms of medals, Africans were given bronze medals as opposed to silver or steel, depending on where they were, and various other issues. And there's big discussions in the Colonial Office papers around this as well. So I think there's a lot of commonality that needs to be looked at by both sides, or across the non-British centred part of the empire. Also, I think I'm quite concerned that we're trying to suggest that others need to fund our stories. I'm from South Africa, and one of the things I've done with the Great Africa Association is actually try and tell the stories ourselves without funding, because if we had to wait for funding and try and find funding, we would never get them told. And the other part, coming from the academic side, is trying to find a way for publishers to actually take a risk on publishing little unknown stories that might not make big sellers out there, because that's the way the stories are going to get told. Publishers won't publish unless they think they're going to make big sales, and our stories at this point aren't big sales.
Thank you. That's an important point. And then final, was there one more question at the back? Maybe the hand's gone down? Okay. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask Georgie I'll go to Georgie first of all, just to perhaps address that point about, was it naval discipline or immigration bordering?
Yeah.
And just your final
I'm not going to
well.
go into a great amount of detail because we haven't got time. But I think the situation is very complex, and we've been painting it in broad brushstrokes. So, for example, at different times, different shipping companies. So at one level you've got the law, and then at the other level you've got the interests of the different shipping companies. And depending upon where those shipping companies were sailing to, their interests were, they would be either more or less interested in making sure that they had their crews back on board. So, it is complicated both over time and over space. But these are all coming into the mix. So that's the first thing. The second thing is agreeing with Anne. Thank you for your comments. So Caroline Adams's work, her oral histories, she did that as a community worker, and a local bookshop published the stories back in 1986. And those books, Caroline died, and then those books have eventually just sold out. They were being sold by a Brick Lane bookshop, and I think there's an attempt now by the bookshop to try and get those stories, those oral histories republished, because they're just so important in the present. But yes, I think that there's a lot of people who do put a lot of time and energy into doing this kind of unfunded work, and in doing so reach many other people. But it's great to have platforms as well, such as being able to come here and to work with you to make sure that they disseminate further. So so thank you so much for kind of helping us with this, with this partnership of reaching out and sharing the stories and their significance more broadly.
Thanks, Georgie. And Asif, I guess you can speak in particular to exactly that point that Anne made about pursuing the histories and sharing them without waiting for funding.
Oh, that's right. I thank Anne for coming here today because she's actually working with me on our book. It's called Unearthing Invisible Seafaring Histories of Empire. It didn't actually delayed because of the pandemic and following my father died of COVID. So I'm going to come back to that book. So hopefully we'll have the book out. I think 2024. We've got any details, so we're working on it. That's about it. I just want to say thank you to everyone. There was something about which Desai mentioned about a sort of, is it a monument? A statue being erected at the Royal Docks.
Yes, something permanent, visible, with a symbolic message for the.
It would be nice, but it just I only see like I read about something like 2,000 seafarers, South Asian seafarers stayed there in a period of 10 days in August in 1892. But all I see today in present day is just one road or street named to their memory, to their legacy, called Lascars Avenue. And I just think that Lascars not actually, it actually means army, it doesn't mean. I know G. Mitton in his book, Pimps at Great Steamships, P.N. and he actually mentioned Lascars as a race, and it's quite a big discussion, but Lascars is not a race, and it's not a name of a class of people, so I think that just having Lascars Avenue to me is a bit degrading or derogatory. I think if you mentioned to my grandmother that was he a Lascar, she would have said, what's that? Because she never spoke English, she would have not known what that means. If you said was he a Lashkar, she would have probably said yes, but then I can't say what definitely because I never met her, but that's what I presume she would have said. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Asif, and thank you, Georgie. And just on that last point, I think when we're talking, I often refer to Bell Hooks, who talks about the struggle of memory and why the struggle of memory is important. And she says it's important not just because it's about a nostalgic exercise, to romantically revisit the past, but because it helps us to kind of see our present for its power relations and structures. And I think that's what you actually do in your academic work, Georgie, is what you've done through the kind of personal family history journey that you've taken us in. So thank you very much for sharing that today. And before I conclude, I just do want to say that Debbie is here at the back from the London Traveller community, and she and her organisation have an event at Parliament, which is an exhibition, but there is an actual event on this Thursday, 8th of June, 7 to 8 p.m, which is Mapping the Histories of London's Travellers. So that's an exhibition that's ongoing this whole week, actually. It's a public exhibition that you can come and visit, but the event, if you want to find out more details, there is a flyer at the front, and Debbie can wave at the back. You can speak to her about it if you would like to find out some more details. And finally, just to thank the invisible colleagues who sit here and do all the leg running and do the typing, and whose fingers are hurting at the end of it because they've been typing, trying to collect everything. So so thank you to everyone, and to Matthew at the back there who set up all the mics and everything else. And thank you to everyone for giving up your Monday evening to come and share this with us as well. All right, thank you.